In the aftermath of heartbreak, the world often feels unbearably loud. Social media amplifies that noise. Everywhere you look, people are announcing happiness, new beginnings, smiling faces carefully framed to suggest that nothing has been lost. In a digital culture that rewards visibility, silence is quickly misread as weakness, avoidance, or emotional collapse. Yet for many people who are going through emotional loss, choosing not to post is not a sign of disappearance. It is a psychological response that deserves to be understood rather than judged. As a counseling psychologist working with people who are heartbroken, I often observe a common inner conflict. On one side, there is pressure to be seen, to explain, to narrate the pain, to prove that one is handling it well. On the other side, there is a deep instinct to withdraw, to protect what little emotional energy remains. When someone stops posting after a breakup, friends may assume they are isolating themselves or falling apart. In reality, many are doing the opposite. They are trying to regain control over a life that suddenly feels exposed and fragile. Heartbreak already strips a person of emotional certainty. Posting during this time can feel like surrendering even more control, allowing strangers, acquaintances, and algorithms to participate in something deeply personal. Silence becomes a boundary. It is a way of saying, even unconsciously, this experience belongs to me before it belongs to anyone else. In a culture where pain is often turned into content, not posting can be an act of resistance against emotional exhibitionism. This silence is not emptiness. It is full of observation, reflection, and quiet processing. Many heartbroken individuals scroll without posting, watching the world move on while they remain still. This stillness is often misinterpreted as stagnation, but psychologically, it is a crucial phase. The mind needs space to reorganize after emotional attachment is broken. Constant sharing interrupts that process, replacing internal understanding with external validation. Importantly, this withdrawal is not always about shyness or introversion. Some of the most emotionally expressive people choose silence after heartbreak because they recognize how vulnerable they are to comparison, judgment, and misinterpretation. When pain is raw, even a well-meaning comment can feel invasive. Silence protects the wound while it is still open. In this sense, being invisible online does not mean disappearing from life. It often means returning to it in a more honest way, away from the pressure to perform recovery before it has truly begun. And as we move forward, it becomes essential to understand what kind of psychological traits allow some heartbroken individuals to remain silent without losing themselves in that silence. That is where the deeper patterns begin to reveal themselves. When someone who is heartbroken chooses not to post on social media, it often reflects a set of psychological traits that are quietly protective rather than avoidant. These individuals tend to have a stronger sense of internal regulation. Instead of immediately seeking relief through external reassurance, they instinctively turn inward. This does not mean they suppress emotions. On the contrary, they feel deeply, but they prefer to process those feelings privately, where they are less likely to be distorted by reactions from OT. One defining characteristic is emotional independence. After a breakup, many people feel an urgent need to redefine their identity. Posting becomes a way to signal survival, desirability, or moral high ground. Those who stay silent often resist this impulse. Their self-worth, while shaken, is not entirely dependent on being witnessed. They may be questioning themselves intensely, but they are not asking the internet to answer those questions for them. Psychologically, this reflects a separation between identity and attention, a distinction that becomes especially important when at. These individuals also tend to be less reactive to social comparison. Heartbreak makes comparison particularly toxic. Seeing an ex appear happy or seeing others' curated relationships can amplify feelings of inadequacy and abandonment. People who avoid posting often do so because they are acutely aware of how comparison destabilizes their emotional state. They choose observation over participation, not out of superiority, but out of self-preservation. By limiting their own visibility, they also reduce the internal pressure to measure their pain against someone else. Another notable trait is reflective awareness. Rather than reacting impulsively, they think before they act and feel before they explain. Posting during heartbreak can lock a person into a narrative they are not ready to commit to. Once something is shared, it becomes fixed in the minds of others, even if the inner experience continues to evolve. Silence allows flexibility. It gives the psyche room to change its understanding without having to. From a counseling perspective, this pattern often reflects a person who values meaning over immediacy. They are not interested in instant relief if it comes at the cost of long-term clarity. They tolerate emotional discomfort better than those who rush to distraction. This tolerance is not strength in the heroic sense, but in the quiet, enduring sense. It allows grief, confusion, and longing to unfold naturally instead of being rushed toward a socially acceptable. Understanding these traits helps us see that silence after heartbreak is not emotional absence. It is emotional containment. And within that containment lies a deeper motivation that goes beyond personality traits. One rooted in a longing for authenticity and a refusal to reduce a complex inner life into something easily consumed. For many people experiencing heartbreak, the decision not to post on social media is closely tied to a deeper pursuit of authenticity. After an emotional rupture, life no longer feels linear or presentable. Feelings arrive in waves, often contradictory, and rarely suitable for neat captions or symbolic images. Those who remain silent are often refusing to compress a complex inner reality into a simplified, consumable version of themselves. They are not rejecting connection, they are rejecting disto. From a psychological standpoint, heartbreak heightens sensitivity to incongruence. When someone feels broken inside but is expected to appear composed or healing online, the gap between inner truth and outer expression becomes painful. Posting can start to feel like acting rather than living. Many clients describe a moment when they realize they are no longer sharing experiences, but performing recovery. At that point, silence becomes a way to restore alignment between what is felt. This is especially common among individuals who have previously been active online. Emotional exhaustion often follows periods of intense sharing. In the beginning, posting may have provided comfort, validation, or a sense of being held by others. Over time, however, the pressure to continue updating, explaining, or justifying one's emotional state can become overwhelming. Heartbreak accelerates this fatigue. The person slowly disappears, not as a dramatic statement, but as a quiet withdrawal from a role. The important authenticity, in this context, is not about being transparent to everyone. It is about being honest with oneself. Not posting allows space for emotions that do not yet have a name. It honors confusion, ambivalence, and unresolved attachment. These states are psychologically fragile, and when prematurely shared, they are often reshaped by feedback, advice, or judgment that may not fit the individual's actual needs. After heartbreak, emotional boundaries become unusually fragile. What once felt private now feels easily invaded, not only by memories of the relationship, but by the reactions and interpretations of others. In this state, choosing not to post on social media often functions as a form of psychological ownership. It is a way of protecting experiences, thoughts, and emotions from becoming communal property before the individual is ready to release them. From a counseling perspective, sharing is not always healing. While connection can be supportive, premature exposure can dilute emotional clarity. When a heartbroken person posts about their pain, that pain immediately becomes subject to commentary, advice, assumptions, and even projection. Others may minimize it, dramatize it, or compare it to their own experiences. Over time, the original emotion can feel altered, no longer fully belonging to the person who felt it first. Silence, therefore, preserves authorship over one's inner narrative. This sense of ownership is closely tied to psychological freedom. Social media subtly conditions people to seek relief through attention. Likes, comments, and messages provide short bursts of validation that temporarily soften pain. However, this relief often comes with a cost. The brain begins to associate expression with reward, and healing with visibility. During heartbreak, this conditioning can trap individuals in a loop where they feel compelled to perform vulnerability rather than genuinely process it. By remaining silent, some people step out of this loop altogether. Silence also allows for the rediscovery of experiences without witnesses. Simple moments, such as working, walking, or sitting alone with thoughts, regain their original texture. There is no pressure to capture or explain them. For someone healing from loss, this simplicity is grounding. It restores a sense of agency at a time when life feels dictated by emotional upheaval. Doing something without documenting it becomes a quiet act of self-trust. It is important to clarify that this silence is not emotional coldness. Many heartbroken individuals feel intensely, but they choose to guard what feels sacred. Certain memories, realizations, or shifts in identity are too delicate to survive immediate exposure. By keeping them private, they allow these experiences to mature internally before being shared selectively, if at all. In therapy, this pattern often reflects a person rebuilding autonomy after emotional enmeshment. A relationship collapse can blur boundaries, leaving someone unsure where they end and others begin. Silence reestablishes that line. It says, without words, that not every inner movement requires an audience. However, not all silence comes from strength or freedom. In some cases, it is shaped by fear, pressure, and emotional exhaustion. Understanding this darker side of silence is essential, because it reveals when withdrawal is protective and when it becomes a sign of deeper distress. That distinction is where the next layer of this psychological experience unfolds. While silence after heartbreak can be a conscious and healthy boundary, it is important to acknowledge that not all silence is chosen from a place of peace. For many heartbroken individuals, withdrawal from social media is driven by fear rather than clarity. Fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, and fear of appearing weak or undesirable often play a powerful role. In a digital environment where every post feels permanently observable, the pressure to present oneself correctly can become overwhelming. This leads to what psychologists often describe as presentation anxiety. After a breakup, identity feels unstable. The question of how one is perceived becomes emotionally charged. Posting something too sad may invite pity. Posting something too happy may feel dishonest. Posting nothing at all may provoke speculation. For some people, the safest option becomes silence, not because they want solitude, but because every form of visibility feels risky. The emotional cost of being seen is simply too high. Emotional exhaustion also contributes to this withdrawal. Heartbreak already drains cognitive and emotional resources. Constant exposure to other people's curated lives intensifies that fatigue. Seeing couples, celebrations, or even an ex-partner's apparent happiness can trigger comparison, self-doubt, and rumination. Rather than becoming bitter or reactive, some individuals instinctively reduce exposure by disengaging from participation altogether. Silence, in this case, is an attempt to regulate emotional overload. There is also a quiet grief in observing without speaking. Many heartbroken people are full of thoughts, insights, and feelings they cannot yet articulate safely. They may write messages and delete them, hover over the post button, and then close the app. This inner dialogue can be exhausting, but but it reflects a deep awareness of vulnerability. Choosing silence becomes a way to prevent further emotional injury while the psyche is still bruised. Importantly, this kind of silence should not be romanticized without nuance. When driven by fear, it can sometimes deepen isolation. The individual may feel unseen and unsupported, even though they appear calm on the surface. In counseling, this is where careful attention is needed. Silence can protect, but it can also conceal suffering if there are no alternative spaces for expression. However, even fear-based silence carries meaning. It signals that the person is overwhelmed, not disengaged from life. It reflects sensitivity rather than indifference. Many people who withdraw during heartbreak are deeply relational. They care so much about connection that the risk of misconnection feels unbearable. As this silence continues, it raises a philosophical question about presence, visibility, and human value. Does existence require acknowledgement to be real, or can meaning grow unseen? Exploring this paradox helps us understand why silence, even when misunderstood, can become a powerful statement of selfhood. That paradox is where the psychological depth of silence truly reveals itself. Silence after heartbreak carries a philosophical weight that often goes unnoticed in a culture obsessed with visibility. At its core lies a quiet paradox. Social media promises connection, yet many heartbroken individuals feel most isolated when they are expected to constantly express themselves. Choosing not to post becomes a way of asserting that existence does not require continuous acknowledgement. One can be real, present, and deeply alive without being witnessed. From a psychological perspective, some of the most profound inner changes occur without language or audience. Grief, emotional growth, and identity reconstruction are largely silent processes. They unfold internally, through reflection, memory, and subtle shifts in self-perception. When these processes are prematurely shared, they can become interrupted or reshaped by external narratives. Silence allows transformation to happen on its own terms. There is also an intimacy in being unseen. Many heartbroken people describe a sense of returning to themselves when they stop performing their emotions. Without the pressure to explain or justify their pain, they can listen more closely to their inner compass. This kind of solitude is not loneliness. It is a relationship with oneself that deepens when attention is withdrawn from the outside world. The paradox becomes clearer when we consider connection. While posting is meant to invite closeness, it often creates distance by encouraging comparison and judgment. Silence, on the other hand, can foster more genuine bonds. When heartbroken individuals connect offline or in private conversations, the interaction is no longer about updates or appearances. It becomes about presence, care, and mutual understanding. There is no need to prove anything, only to be felt. In therapy, this is often the stage where individuals begin to recognize that their worth has not diminished with the loss of a relationship. They start to sense that they exist beyond roles, labels, and narratives. Silence reinforces this realization. It communicates, internally, that the self does not vanish when it is not displayed. This realization can be deeply stabilizing after the disorientation of heartbreak. However, silence is frequently misinterpreted by others as withdrawal or emotional distance. Friends may worry, and observers may assume indifference. Yet, psychologically, this silence often reflects a person who is deeply engaged in the work of healing. They are not avoiding life. They are meeting it without filters. As this inner stability strengthens, silence begins to change in quality. It is no longer merely protective or reflective. It becomes a foundation for a more secure sense of identity, one that is less dependent on external validation. Understanding how this identity security develops helps us see the long-term impact of choosing silence during emotional recovery. And that is where the final dimension of this process comes into focus. As heartbreak slowly loosens its grip, The long-term effects of silence begin to reveal themselves in subtle but powerful ways. Individuals who remain offline during emotional recovery often develop a stronger sense of identity security. They rediscover who they are without the constant feedback loop of reactions, opinions, and digital affirmation. This security does not mean they no longer care about others. It means their self-worth is no longer negotiated in public spaces. Neurologically, stepping away from posting reduces dependence on the dopamine cycles created by likes and comments. During heartbreak, the brain is already deprived of attachment-based rewards. Chasing digital validation can mimic intimacy without truly replacing it, often delaying genuine healing. Silence interrupts this pattern. Over time, emotional regulation stabilizes, and mood becomes less reactive to external stimuli. Many individuals report a quiet clarity returning, along with a deeper tolerance for emotional complexity. This internal stability allows life to feel fuller again, not because it is shared, but because it is experienced. Moments regain depth, conversations become more present. Time feels less rushed. Without the impulse to document, attention sharpens. This heightened presence often leads to what can be described as living more intensely. Not dramatically, but authentically. The person notices details they once overlooked, including their own needs and values. Despite these benefits, silent individuals are often misunderstood. They may be seen as distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. In reality, their silence reflects confidence rather than avoidance. They understand that not every truth is meant for the crowd. Some experiences are sacred precisely because they remain private. By protecting these moments, they prevent them from being reshaped by trends, opinions, or fleeting judgments. In the context of heartbreak, this approach to living becomes a quiet form of self-respect. The person no longer feels compelled to prove resilience or advertise growth. Healing happens whether it is seen or not. This realization marks a profound shift from external performance to internal alignment. Ultimately, silence acts as a mirror. It reflects back a simple but often forgotten truth. A human being is not a story to be constantly told, but a life to be lived. Those who choose silence after heartbreak are not hiding from the world. They are rebuilding themselves in spaces untouched by noise. In a culture that equates visibility with value, their quiet presence is a reminder of something deeply human. Meaning does not require an audience. Love, loss, and transformation do not need witnesses to be real. And sometimes, the most honest expression of healing is not a post, but a life slowly becoming whole again.